All around us, there's this invisible architecture, a layer of code that we don't see, but it's constantly at work. It's picking your next song, it's deciding what news you see, it's even choosing your next potential date. But what if I told you this system is doing way more than just serving you content? It's making critical decisions about you, and in some cases, it's even deciding who you're going to become. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the code that is quietly but totally reshaping our lives. So let's just get right to it with a question that might sound a little crazy. Forget your resume for a second. Forget all the skills you've built, all the experience you've earned. Could the one thing you have no control over, your last name, actually be what's holding you back? It feels like something from another era, right? But in the age of AI, it's a question we absolutely have to ask. And the answer? Well, according to some pretty startling research out of the MIT Media Lab, the answer is a resounding yes. Look, this isn't about one rogue algorithm or a single glitchy piece of software. What they found was a consistent, widespread pattern of bias. We're talking about the biggest decisions of your life: getting hired, being promoted, even getting a loan for a house. It turns out AI is learning, and it's automating some of the oldest, ugliest prejudices in our society. The MIT researchers actually coined a term for this. They call it algorithmic inheritance. And it's a really important idea. What it means is that all the historical baggage tied to a surname, hints about your family's social standing, their wealth, where they came from, all of that is now being fed into these AI systems. And the AI, which was supposed to be objective, right, is just reinforcing those old biases. Instead of creating a meritocracy, it's at risk of locking in inequality for generations. So you have to wonder, how did we get here? How did we manage to build systems with such a massive fundamental flaw? Well, here's the really unsettling part. What if it's not a flaw? What if, to the companies that build these things, this kind of bias is just a side effect of what the system is really designed to do? Let's take a look at the architecture that makes it all happen. To really get this, we need to understand two key concepts. First, you've probably heard of the filter bubble. That's your own little private universe of information, curated just for you based on everything you've ever clicked on. But that bubble, it can harden into something else, an echo chamber. And that's when the algorithm doesn't just show you what you like, it surrounds you with people who think exactly like you, amplifying your own beliefs over and over again until you never hear a dissenting voice. One creates your worldview, the other builds walls around it. Okay, but why? Why would the system push us into these corners? This leaked memo from inside Facebook spills the beans. They say it right there in their own words. The system's goal isn't to show you the truth or to connect people or to be neutral. The goal is engagement. And their own internal data showed that the angrier the content, the more divisive it is, the better it performs. It keeps our eyes on the screen, and that's the only thing that matters. This chart really just says it all, doesn't it? For the giants, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, user engagement isn't just one goal among many. It's the whole game. It's the engine of their business model. Everything else, being neutral or, God forbid, you actually being aware of how the system manipulates you, that's a distant, distant second. This is the logic that creates both the hiring bias and the filter bubbles. It's an architecture built for attention, not for fairness. But the fallout from this engagement engine goes so much deeper than our news feeds or our job prospects. It's having a massive and maybe even permanent impact on the development of an entire generation. Now, we need to talk about how this code is actively rewiring the brains of young people. Maybe you've seen this expression online. People call it the Gen Z stare. And a lot of people write it off as just boredom or apathy. But what if it isn't an attitude at all? What if, as some researchers are starting to suggest, it's actually an adaptation, a physical response from the nervous system to growing up under the weight of constant algorithmic judgment, of chronic overstimulation? It's like a defensive shell against a digital world that is always, always watching. And this leads us to a really powerful concept from an article in The Brink. They call it algorithmic adolescence. And here's the danger they point out. Your teenage years are supposed to be messy, right? You're supposed to be confused and try on different identities. But these algorithms are short-circuiting that entire process. They see a teenager have one fleeting moment of sadness or one day of anxiety, and they interpret that feeling as a permanent, stable personality trait. And then they lock it in. Here's exactly how that feedback loop plays out. So, a teen is having an off day. They can't focus, and they watch one video about ADHD out of curiosity. Boom. The algorithm sees that signal. it immediately starts flooding their feed with more content about ADHD. The teen starts to see themselves in these videos, and they begin to adopt the label, the behaviors. The algorithm sees this, and it doubles down, feeding them even more content to reinforce this new identity. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, all because of one bad day. And don't think this takes weeks or months. It's incredibly fast. A 2024 investigation by Mozilla found that it can take TikTok's algorithm as little as 40 minutes to figure out a user's deepest emotional vulnerabilities. Just think about that for a second. The system isn't really designed to find out what you like. It's designed to find your weak spots, your sadness, your anxiety, your body image issues, and then exploit them with content that makes it impossible to look away. So let's just tie these two big ideas together. On the one hand, you have this massive, societal-level sorting machine, the code that helps decide who gets a shot at success. And on the other, you have this deeply personal impact, the code that's shaping who a young person believes they are. But here's the thing, and this is what's so chilling. These aren't two separate problems. It is the exact same architecture, the same engine, optimized for one thing and one thing only, engagement. And it is simultaneously creating inequality in our professional lives, while it hardens identity in our personal ones. So, given all this, it's no surprise that society is finally starting to push back. The Wild West era of move fast and break things seems to be coming to an end. A new chapter, one focused on accountability, is just beginning. So, what does it actually look like when we try to write new rules for these powerful, globe-spanning systems? For a lot of young people, the online world is pure chaos. It is a fire hose of notifications, constant social pressure, and a minefield of genuinely harmful content. This is the reality that new regulations are trying to get a handle on. It's an attempt to bring some sort of order and safety to a world that was designed to have none. And probably the biggest effort so far is the European Union's Digital Services Act, or the DSA. And what it does is represent a massive shift in thinking. Instead of platforms just promising to clean up their messes, the DSA is built on principles like safety by design. It forces these companies to build safety and privacy into their products from day one, making a child's well-being a priority over raw engagement. And this isn't just a bunch of philosophical ideas. The DSA has teeth. It has specific, legally binding rules for the big platforms. Things that seem like common sense, like you can't run targeted ads at kids anymore. You have to provide real tools for parents. And maybe most importantly, you have to give users more control over the recommendation algorithms that are shaping their reality. It's a direct shot at weakening those identity feedback loops we were just talking about. When you boil it all down, the DSA is a major turning point. It's really one of the first big legal frameworks anywhere in the world that stops asking platforms to do better and starts forcing them to be legally accountable for the safety of their users, especially the most vulnerable ones. It's basically an attempt to build a shield against the worst impulses of the engagement economy. So we've followed this thread from a single line on a resume all the way down to the deepest parts of our identity. And we've seen the first real attempts to rein it all in. And that brings all of these pieces together and leaves us with one last really big question. Let's just quickly recap the journey we've been on. It all started with a subtle yet powerful bias coded into a system. Then we found the engine driving it all, the relentless pursuit of engagement. We saw the devastating consequence for a generation's sense of self. And finally, we're seeing the first glimmers of a response as society tries to write new rules for this new world. It's a classic story of unintended consequences, crashing headfirst into very intentional design. And that brings us right here to the fundamental challenge we face. Regulation is a start. It can put up some guardrails. It can demand more accountability. But as long as the core mission of the code remains the same, as long as it's built to do nothing but maximize engagement at all costs, are we just treating the symptoms instead of the disease? So the question we're left with is this: is it enough to just regulate the machine? Or do we need to do something far more radical and fundamentally rewrite its purpose, to build a new kind of algorithm, one that optimizes not for our attention, but for our well-being? That is the code we haven't written yet.